schools can support greater diversity effectively by ensuring that policy and practice are aligned in the school organisation. Schools have a responsibility to ensure that the curriculum covers the protected characteristics, and schools also have a responsibility under keeping children safe in education to ensure that prejudice against those who perhaps carry those protected characteristics are not subject to abuse and not subject to discrimination. And this means that pastoral systems and behaviour systems and policy around the curriculum all have to work together to ensure that diversity is something that is at the heart of a school's existence. I think it's important to ensure that there is representation of diverse identities in schools. That might be amongst your teaching staff, actively, proactively seeking staff who have different identities and different backgrounds, and having them in leadership positions where you can, to show the pipeline for people from different protected characteristics, and also to make sure there's a visibility of different identities within the school setting, not just in terms of texts, but in terms of content across the curriculum. So when we think about what happens in history, is that as strong as what happens in the literature curriculum? Is that as strong as what happens in PSHE or the sport curriculum or the PE curriculum? And regular auditing of the curriculum means that you can have it woven through rather than just something that's done during Black History Month or Disability History Months. I think in terms of encouraging children to feel safe and that they belong is a huge part of diversity in schools. And so thinking about policies around inclusion, particularly around our young people who are LGBT, thinking about spaces where they might feel more vulnerable, or really struggle to engage with certain subjects such as PE. How have you had that conversation with your staff? How have you had that conversation with the young people? How have you had that conversation with the community? If we are going to be diverse and accepting and foster that sense of belonging, we have to preempt these problems and not just deal with them while they come up on a case-by-case basis. So the embedding of diversity as a principle is hugely important for schools. We can ensure longevity of diversity in English by having really deep curriculum conversations about why we include certain texts, why we include certain voices, and how we consciously craft that curriculum around um, the value of the text and the value of the voice. What I've often found leads to a lack of longevity is just throwing in a text because it has a Black writer or an LGBT writer. That's tokenistic. You don't necessarily want to have that as a kind of your long-term plan. The discussion really should be whose voices are missing, whose voices have been traditionally marginalized, whose voices are valuable to what we're teaching, and how can we expand our knowledge around what's out there within literature to be able to present a perhaps more rounded view. One of the things that I advocate for is not just centering your curriculum around particular texts, but thinking about genre. So when we're thinking about a text, it's really limited to that author at that time and that context. But if we're thinking about Bildungsroman or short stories or ballads or sonnets, you can actually expand the range of literature that you include within those categories much more easily and much more seamlessly than if you are just plonking a text into the middle of the curriculum thinking that's the end of it and I don't need to do anything else. I think some people will rely on contemporary fiction, and I think contemporary fiction is really important, young adult fiction, to provide some of that diversity, but texts do change, and tastes change. And so, having the flexibility in your curriculum to add things in as society changes, I think is a hugely important thing for schools to do. And schools can support their English departments in particular to do this by ensuring that there is budget available to get those texts in, because one of the big barriers to text change and resource change is the lack of availability of money to be able to do so. And so making sure that there's a realistic budget for the English department, especially in the light of rising costs of everything, that they are able to sustain that change over years, rather than trying to do something one off for 1 year and then not having the budget to do anything else.